Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead for today's live on really September fall gardening. I will be there in 30 seconds. Please let me know if you can hear me, see a picture of my garden. I'm just going to set up the chat and then we will get started. All right, welcome to the Rusted Garden. Again, I'm just waiting for verification from somebody that you can see me and hear me. It looks like everything is working on this end. I have a lot to cover today. This is a public live. Typically every second Thursday and fourth Thursday, I do a live mentoring Q&A where I really just take questions. The questions for today, I'm not going to take till the end of the presentation. And today I'm going to be covering what to plant in your fall garden in September. And I'm going to really just go over an overview that would help you all get started with fall gardening. Because I'm in Maryland Zone 7, temperatures are different here than over there, or over there, or over there. So you want to use these as guidelines. I'm just checking here on the chat and we'll get started. All right, so everything is on index cards. Like I said, there's a lot to cover. So fall gardening, what is fall gardening? Fall gardening is really growing the cool weather crops. These are crops that can take a freeze on the leaves. The leaves can freeze solid. They can defrost. Usually they get the frost at night. They defrost during the day and they keep growing. So we'll be talking about this, but you don't have to stop gardening your fall crops when frost arrives. Your first frost is usually the guideline where you try and figure out when you're going to plant. So we'll be talking about planting the September garden, but that's going to vary because over, in Texas and Arizona, you guys are still having really hot temperatures. It's not time for planting your fall crops in September. Yours will really be probably October, maybe November. So the months are going to vary depending on where your garden is. So let me just give you a couple basics. First thing, the cool weather crops, and I'm just checking, looks good. Everyone can see and hear me. The cool weather crops like 55 degrees Fahrenheit or 12.5 degrees Celsius nights. They like those cooler temperatures. 55 F, 12.5 Celsius, that's the average. They can manage down to upper 40s. They can manage with, a couple degrees higher in the 60s and stuff like that. The average perfect day temperature is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 23.5 degrees Celsius. Those are the cooler fall temperatures here in Maryland. If the temperatures push up too high, the cool crops sometimes don't germinate. They don't do well. We'll be talking about that. So these crops can take a frost. So they can take a light frost, which is actually, it can be a pretty significant frost that the whole leaf of your lettuce plant freezes and it gets these beautiful frost patterns on there in the morning, and I love taking pictures of that. Then they defrost, they look a little limp, they spring back. The cool crops have a cell structure that when ice forms in the cell, it doesn't burst them and disrupt them. Like if a frost hits your tomato plants or your pepper plants, squash, cucumbers, the warm weather crops, that freeze disrupts the cell, the plants die off. So your cool crops can take that frost. The issue becomes when you get a prolonged ground freeze, when that top half inch, which is 1.25 centimeters to inch, 2.5 centimeters, that top part of the soil freezes for a prolonged period of time. That kind of impacts where the stem of the cool crop goes into the ground and then the roots come out. And sometimes when that freezes solid for a prolonged period, that cool crop dies off. Some of them, can manage that. So I just don't want you to worry about that. You can only plant and grow fall crops to that first frost date, okay? So I want to just go over real quick. Number one barrier to fall gardening is if you don't have a garden. I put into the chat, I'm going to put it in again real quick. This is a video I just did at my daughter's house. She just moved. And I just want to add that you can build a garden now. You don't have to build a new garden or a new space in only spring. You can certainly do it now. So if you need more space or you don't have a garden and you're interested in, let's see if this works. Hang on. Go ahead and watch this video. That will teach you how to build an entire garden. Okay. Space is also an issue. A lot of these crops you can tuck in around where your warm crops are. Some of them are becoming out now. Some of them are still growing. Right now, I get burned out usually July 15th to August 15th, sometimes a little bit longer. When the heat rolls in, I have to water, the insects come, the diseases come. So I know a lot of us might be frustrated, tired out. I really recommend trying to, take a deep breath. Any beat up summer crops, just get rid of them. Get them out of sight, out of mind, and then get some fall crops in. Don't, go for a huge fall garden, but just get some seeds in. I think you'll be happier when, later September rolls in, October, even November, and you've got the fall crops coming in. It's a pleasant change from, the heat of the summer. So I'm in Maryland, zone 7. Today, it's 76 degrees Fahrenheit, 24 degrees Celsius. The night's going to be 53 degrees Fahrenheit, that 11.6 degrees Celsius, the perfect temperatures. So, of course, I garden and I do my videos based on what's going on temperature-wise in Maryland. So you may have to adjust this forward or backwards, but this is going to give you the overview. Perfect for direct seeding. So these temperatures, that 55 degree Fahrenheit night, cool nights, cool days in the 70s, is perfect for direct seeding. You really want to hold off some of your crops. I'll be talking about those for direct seeding, and I'll explain the reasons why. Let me pause just 1 second. So in July and August, you can plant cool weather crops also, but that's a group that doesn't bolt quickly. They don't go to flower, or they don't go to seed quickly. Some seeds, if you start in the warmth of July and August, they grow and then they send up flower stalks right away. So you're wasting your time getting those cool weather crops in. I'll be talking about those as a group and then the group that you want to plant in September. But using the July heat, the August heat, you can really get some of your cool weather crops growing and maturing. So let me talk about how do you plan your fall garden, because you want to get the timing right. Like you hear me saying, oh, right now, and it's a little confusing. Oh, you can plant some in July. You can plant some in August. Some of them you have to hold off till September. I'm going to do the overview on that. But trying to figure out when do you start your fall garden really works this way. You want to find your first average first frost date. I was talking about spring. So you want to know when that first frost date arrives to your area. And let's just say, for the example, first frost date here would be October 31st. Then you want to add, this is where it gets confusing. So we have October 31st as the first frost date. And then you want to add 30 days to that, because what's really important is knowing that these cool weather crops don't stop at the first frost. They usually stop at the first hard freeze. So you usually, generally speaking, you have 3 or 4 weeks after your first frost date before that hard frost rolls in. That's places that you have winters. For example, in Maryland, We get down well below freezing. We get freezing temperatures for prolonged days. You can't really grow during that period, especially late December, January, and February. But these plants can take a frost. So you might get periods of frost, 3-4 weeks after your first frost date. These plants can still mature. That's without any protection. One tip is if you want to throw some plastic over them, you can get another 2, 3, 4 weeks of growing out of them. So first frost date, October 31st, add 30 days, November 30th, and then you would go back, today is September 2nd. So I would have September, October, November, 90 days to grow my cool weather crops. And that's how you figure out when to start your garden for the fall. And you can even push that into August and July for certain crops. It's just that some of the cool crops do okay with the hotter temperatures. Some of the cool crops really want that 75-degree day, that 55-degree night average. So now that we know, for the example here in Maryland, let's just say I have 90 days. I'm going to look at the maturity dates of the cool crops. And we're going to get to the cool crops. I don't want to throw out all the seeds. Cool crops are really anything that can take a frost. But we'll do that in a second. So if on the seed pack, say you're looking at, let's just think of one real quick, maybe peas. Or, no, actually peas isn't a good example, because here's why. Peas, the leaves can take a frost, and they do really well. So they defrost, they do fine. But the flowers in the actual pea, if they freeze from a frost, they're going to get rubbery and they're not going to taste good. So peas are a little bit different, that you have to make sure you have a window for them to mature and then to harvest before that first frost comes. All the other crops, generally speaking, can pretty much, take the frost. So let's just say, lettuce matures in 45 days. And most, if you think about it, most of your cool crops are lots of leafy greens. You have broccoli, you have cauliflower. So whatever the day it says for harvest, let's say it's 45 days to maturity, you want to just make sure you add on 10 days for a harvesting period for those plants to get bigger and for you to harvest them. And what you're looking for is that cushion before the heavy freeze comes in and freezes the ground. So it's not just to the maturity date to harvest on the seed pack. You want a little bit of cushion after that, and we're sort of building that in there. I know that's confusing. If you have questions, ask it at the end. But this allows you to figure out when to start your garden. So, for instance, if the plant matures in 60 days, I add 10 days to it. That's 70 days. And then I'm looking to see if I have 70 days of growing, which I do, because I went from September 2nd to November 31st. It's about 90 days. So my 70 days fits into that 90-degree or that 90-day period. Hopefully that makes sense. The benefit for late summer planting, when you're putting in your cool weather crops, they germinate really quickly. They grow really quickly. So even though the to maturity date or to harvest date may be 60 days on the pack of seeds, it's usually calculating that from winter, early spring into summer. So the plants are going to grow more quickly, and that's a benefit. So you're going to be figuring out when is the best time to plant certain crops, and we'll be covering that in a second. Well, we'll be covering it now because it's number 5 on here. Figuring out when to plant. Start a journal. So pick, first of all, the cool weather crops you enjoy. Plant some of them, for example, August 1st, August 15th, September 1st. Experiment. See which ones mature nicely, get to good size, get into the fall, mature first, you get them to the table. That gives you a good sense of the date of when to plant. Maybe the August 1st, August 15th, they look good. Maybe the August 1st plantings in your area, it's just way too hot. They don't do well. So they don't really germinate well. They don't really grow well to say August 15th or September 1st. But by planting, in 2-week to 3-week periods over usually late July, August, September for Maryland area, or maybe if you're warmer, it'd be middle August, September, early October area, you'll figure out the perfect timing to get your crops in. You're not going to necessarily know when's the best time for a cool weather crop until you do it. And I do recommend just journaling and writing down the dates, and you check off flavor, full production, full head of broccoli, didn't work out, freeze came too soon or too early, and they died. So you want to be able to figure that out. So I want to just throw in a couple more videos. In the actual video description of this video, you'll find linked all the videos I'm talking about. But I have, actually I'm not going to put them into the chat. They're already in the chat. Just go to the video description. But I have videos called 7 Key Crops to Direct Sow in September and October. These are all timestamped, so you can just jump to the parts that you like. 20 tips to know before starting your cool crops, your fall garden. 10 crops to direct sow and seed in August and July. Those 3 videos really cover the span of when to start cool crops here in Maryland Zone 7 or similar. And again, you'll adjust forward or backward depending where you're at. Now remember, 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 12.5 degrees Celsius is the perfect average night temperature. 75 degrees Fahrenheit, 23.5 degrees Celsius, the perfect day temperature for your cool crops. And it can vary up and down. There is a range. This is the perfect time to direct seed any of your cool crops, but you need enough time for the plants to mature. So that's why figuring out if you have 90 days, because broccoli, Brussels sprouts can take much longer to form to the point that you want to harvest them. And if you don't have that window of just mild frosts, they're not going to do well. All right, let me just pause for a second. So knowing the crops that take a while, there are a lot of cool crops that we can sow when the summer heat is out. That's like 85 to 90 degree Fahrenheit days. It's really warm. About 29.4 Celsius to 32.2 degrees Celsius. So on these hotter days of the summer, you want to plant some of these crops. You can also put these crops in as transplants. Let me just do some quick tips for transplants. If you're growing transplants, you want them in larger containers. You want them to mature about 6 to 8 weeks before you put them into your garden. The reason a lot of people do transplants is because all the summer crops are right now in the garden. So you're growing your cool crops, your fall crops, in containers somewhere. Don't let them sit in full sun. They will bake. You want them to where they get morning sun if they're outside, some afternoon if they're outside, or you can do them inside. But if you let a container sit where it's getting 8-10 hours of your direct sun when those temperatures are high, it can really dry them out, kill them off, but it can make them bolt. So you want to protect your transplants. Here in Maryland, I can direct seed, and I will be putting all these crops into the video description for tomorrow, so that if you want to go back, you can, kind of just jump around to what I'm talking about. It'll all have timestamps. But broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, peas can go in now, but remember the pods can't freeze. Kale, collards, cabbage. Just your standard cabbage, not the Napa cabbage or the Chinese cabbage. Carrots, beets, turnips, lettuce, Swiss chard, and endive can all be direct seeded. Now, by putting them in July, like I did some in July 15th, you'll see them in the videos, and some in August, they're to nice size. Like my carrots are like this tall. Some of these crops will be in 2 categories. But you can use the warmth of the summer now to get them growing. A tip I'll be talking about is if it gets too hot, you can put shade cloth over them. The idea is figuring out when's the best time to get these crops in the ground, but also you want to get a harvest, sooner than later. So you can get the first wave of your cool crops in July, August, again, adjusted based on where your garden is. Some other things that you can sow during July, August, and September if it's still warm, if it's really hot, you don't have your cool temperatures coming yet. Oregano, thyme, chives, and sage. Those are perennial herbs that aren't going to mature right now, but you're going to be able to get them established. They can take a frost, they can freeze, they're perennials that come back every year, and next year they're going to come back with full force. So you can get those perennial herbs in. You can also plant dill and cilantro. Cilantro can take a freeze, or can take a frost. Even dill can take a frost, which I just found out a couple years ago. But they are great to plant in August. You can even put them in now. The hard freeze may affect the dill, but cilantro does pretty good, and in fact, it prefers the cooler temperatures of the fall and light frost actually. So we have dill and cilantro, and that's about 19 crops that can go in. The crops that you want to be sowing now, if it's warmer in your area in September, July, August here in Maryland, are the longer maturing crops. You use the summer heat to get them growing, to get them established. Like my collards are like this big now from the ground because I got them in about August 1st. My kale is getting bigger. I have some standard cabbage, I think maybe New Brunswick or early Jersey Wakefield. They get to size sooner by using the warmth, but they're not going to bolt. They're not going to be a problem. And as they get to the point where I want to harvest, it's going to be the fall, the cool weather. The cool weather gives them a nice sweet flavor. The leaves are more tender. So I'm really figuring out the balance of the time from July, into the fall garden. All right, so things that you can direct seed now. Again, 55-degree Fahrenheit nights, 12.5 degrees Celsius, 75-degree days, Fahrenheit, 23.5 degrees Celsius, the days. These crops that I'm going to talk about now, the reason that they're more of a September crop when it's cool, it's because they can bolt really quickly, which means they germinate fine in August, but then they send out a flower, they want to turn to seed, and you don't get a good harvest out of them. So that can be one of the main issues. So you're waiting really for these crops to be planted when it's generally cooler. Although you could use shade cloth to help them get started a little bit early if you wanted to. Maybe your heavy freeze comes in early where you live. Maybe you're up north more. You could use shade cloth and plant these more in, July, August. Some of them don't like to germinate. The Chinese cabbages and sometimes spinach won't really germinate well above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which, is, again, let me just go back to my notes. It's like maybe 24, 25 degrees Celsius. So temperatures do make a difference for some of the crops. All right, let me just see where I'm at here. 1 second. All right. So here's the thing. July, August, the sun comes up. It's really hot. The sun's beating down. It can warm up that top inch of soil to well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Can heat it up 37.8 degrees Celsius. It can be too hot. Not that they won't germinate, but when a seed first germinates, it doesn't put out a big root system. So if you don't keep the watering up on these plants, they can die. They can germinate. They dry out so quickly because the sun dries that top inch, 2.5 centimeters, 2 inches, 5 centimeters of soil. The germinating seeds die. So you really have to pay attention to that. Most importantly, the warmth of the soil causes the plants we're going to talk about next to really want to bolt and germinate. So it's a timing thing. And this video is a little bit hard to do because I'm trying to cover, all the US and, potentially different countries around the world. And in Australia, the seasons are completely flipped, but you get the idea. I have 2 books. My first book, The Modern Homestead Garden, everything you need to know about vegetable gardening. It will help you get started. You can find these on Amazon, or anywhere books are really sold online. And then my second book, Growing in an Edible Landscape, couple chapters on setting up your vegetable garden, but it also talks about how to change your entire property into an edible landscape, if that's something that interests you. So the main crops that I direct seed here in Maryland, which I just did a video on, are radishes, spinach, Chinese cabbage, bok choy, pak choy, and arugula. I found if I plant those sooner, before the temperatures start coming down, like I've been talking about, they just don't do well. The arugula will send up a flower really quickly. The bok choy will get about this big, send up a flower. The Napa Chinese cabbages don't do well. Spinach sometimes doesn't want to germinate. That also flowers really early when the soil is too warm. And then radishes can be problematic. So again, to direct seed in September, the main crops I talk about are radishes, spinach, Chinese cabbage, bok choy, pak choy, arugula. I put in an additional wave of beets, turnips, and carrots. They tend to do pretty well. I also plant those in July and August. So it's not like one or the other. Late summer when it's warmer or when it's cooler. If you have a long extended winter that doesn't really get to a deep freeze, all these crops that I've talked about can be direct seeded. And, again, it's going to vary just based on what's going on. So we're almost to the point of finishing up the presentation. Let me take some questions now. So if you are putting questions in, I'm going to go zoom up and see if I missed any, but if I missed them, please put them out there again. And you'll know because I'm going to just start here. So Angela, trying to plan better, where can I find info on crop yields for different fruiting plants, tomatoes, eggplant, zooks? Goal is to share, not to preserve. I don't know. Angela's a perk member. Let's pick that question up when we do the perk membership Q&A so I can put more thought into it and answer it better. I really want to get through today's presentation. But off the top of my head, I don't know. Big Will, how long should I let my late planted potatoes grow into the cooler months? Is there a temperature range that is no longer suitable or useful for growth? So the potatoes beneath the surface, and you can actually throw some potatoes in now if you have 90 days before that frost comes, and you'll get lots of baby potatoes. But the answer is just let them grow. The upper growth is sensitive to frost. A mild frost is going to kill the greens down, and that's pretty much a good time to harvest them because they're not going to grow anymore. So you're just looking for the frost date. Angela, my summer garden started in late June. I'm in 7B near you. Pep's finally fruiting. How low can night temperatures go before I have to transition to fall plants? So I'm not exactly sure, but when the nights are really staying in the 50s, production of your peppers are going to slow down. And again, this is kind of why I did the overview, because a lot of us have the warm crops still going, the temperatures are dropping, and the thing is like you might have some really nice mild nights, Angela, but then one night just drops into 49 degrees Fahrenheit real quick, or 2 nights at 52 degrees. That just kind of messes up the production of the plants, and things begin to slow down. What varieties of spinach do I prefer? Bloomsdale Longstanding is a good one. I haven't tried Winter Giant. And I do like, I believe it's called Giant Noble. That's a good one. All right, let me see if I missed any other questions. Again, throw your questions out now. Serena, when the season ends, do you mix the mulch into your soil for faster composting and leave it on the top and remove it to a pile? Very good question. I think that is related to fall gardening. When you're direct seeding, you also do want to move the wood chips or mulch away too, and you want to direct seed right into the soil. A couple of things on that, which is the next part, is when you are getting ready to plant your fall garden, you don't have to add tons of fertilizer if you don't have it. If you have compost, always add that in. But you don't really have to add in more organic granular fertilizer. That's a slow release. Most of the garden is set up nicely already from everything you already did. If you want to save money, you only need that water-soluble fertilizers. Like get the seeds into the ground, get the transplants into the ground, and then when the seeds germinate and they've been growing for about a week, hit them with a water-soluble. Your transplants, when you put them in, hit them with the water-soluble. That's usually enough fertilizer. So you don't even really have to go crazy with feeding and prepping the soil for a fall garden. So I would move the mulch to a corner. If you mix in mulch that is more wood and stuff like that, it can rob your soil from nitrogen. If you have like leaf mulch or something like that, sure, you can mix it in. But when everything is done, the fall garden is done, if it's really fine particles of mulch, mixing it in is okay. If it's bigger chunks of wood and stuff like that, I just like to put it to the side, or I just leave it right on top. And if you're going to ask a question, you do have to put question in front of it so I see it. Question, why am I doing this on a Monday? This is just an additional public live Q&A. In the beginning of each month, I'm probably going to do something like this for what to plant in your garden, and it's sort of a new standalone event. Hi, Erica. New sub, thank you. All right, let me go back down to the bottom. If I missed your question, throw it back out there again. Let's see if there's anything new. Question, can I fall plant into the same pots where I had sunflowers? You want to break up the roots? Yes, there's some, information that sunflowers can inhibit the growth of plants around them, but that's for living plants. So if the roots are, chopped up, the soil solution you could plant into there. Julie, oh, hold on. And again, make sure you put question there. Julie, how frost tolerant are beets? I tried to start seeds, but have been too hot. I'm replanting today. They are very frost tolerant. So my beets actually survive the winter, but the beet, after getting beat up in the winter, is no good, but the leaves grow again and you can harvest the leaves. So they are pretty hardy. They can take the frost. Leaf-wise, if the ground's not freezing solid, even if it freezes a little bit, beets do well. So I would definitely replant them. And this is a good case because you are figuring out with July, August, September for Maryland, you're figuring out when to get your cool weather crops in. The ones that take longer to mature, we tend to plant in July and August. The ones that can be direct seeded, like the cool weather, so they don't bolt, we plant beginning of September, late August. I will be planting some lettuce now. And part of it is like we're saying for the example is that the first frost date here in Maryland is October 31st. Lettuce will do fine through frost, light frost. So that will get me to that November 30th period or whatever. If I just put some plastic over it, prop it up a little bit, I can keep growing lettuce through December here in Maryland. So it's a good crop to put in again. All right, where are we at? 12:33. Let me go over some important tips for your fall garden. So this is really important, and I've already lost. Like one of the things when I was putting in crops July 15th, August 1st, they grew, I went away, grasshoppers came in and chewed down a lot of my beets, a lot of my lettuce. When we're planting our cool crops going in the spring, cool crops going in the fall. When we're planting our cool crops, the ones that can take a frost, from late winter, early spring into late spring, early summer, the pests and diseases are dormant or haven't shown up or haven't woken up. So you get a lot easier growth. When you're putting in your crops now, pests and disease are going to be really active. So you do want to have a plan in place. If you have to cover certain crops so the grasshoppers don't get them, if you have to put down more slug and snail bait so the snails don't, rush in and get them, if you have to put, some sort of covering over it so birds don't come down and pick out the, germinated seedlings, you're going to have to do that. The other thing is that the sun can be really intense for a couple of days. So you might want to get a 50% shade cloth. It'll block 50% of the sun, will let 50% of the sun in. So you can cover your ground late July and August with the shade cloth, and you can get a lot of these cool weather crops going where otherwise it would be too hot in your area. And if you go to the video description, find my Amazon storefront links. I give you examples of different shade cloth you can buy. So for insects and fungus, you want to have a plan. Maybe you want to get, your basic antifungal spray set up. You want to spray or dust your crops early on just so the insects don't come in and wipe them out. And it can happen like that. Just remember, fungus and insects are really active for your late summer, early fall garden. Let me see if there's any other questions. Why do bees and ants pulverize their blackberries? I'm shocked. I don't know the answer to it. Ants, so I haven't had bees be an issue, but they love the sugar of a lot of blackberries. So very quickly, they can come in and start, basically devastating them. They want to share. What I have found is, just for a side note, for ants, I have videos using borax, which is, I think it's sodium tetraborate is the chemical. It's a safe chemical. Don't eat it. We use it in our laundry. But borax is the laundry blend. If you go, laundry brand. If you go to that aisle in your grocery store, you're looking for borax. I make a mix of borax and sugar, and that quickly kills off the ants. Serena, when the season ends, when do you test or amend your soil? I don't test my soil. It's great to test your soil when you first start, so you have a general idea what's going on. But once you have a lot of beds and you're, fertilizing them different ways, the numbers get all messed up. So it's not always accurate. So what I do is at the end of the season, when everything's being put to sleep, I will put down more compost. I might sprinkle down some organic granular. I will put mulch down, and I just set the beds up like that, let them rest. I have a lot of wood ash from burning wood. I gently put a layer of wood ash over my beds. I don't overdo it because it can impact the pH, but not if you're just doing a little bit. So I do that at the end of the season, and I just let them do their thing. Come spring, I usually have more compost. I prep the beds. When I do a planting hole, putting in transplants, I amend that. So that's how I take care of my beds. Martin, I saw that you have a question, but make sure everybody, we still have time. I'm going to stay on, another 20 minutes. Just put question in front so I catch it easy. I have a question. For some reason, I'm having trouble growing basil, parsley, and other herbs except oregano. I tried 3 ways this year. One I tried growing indoors in March 2nd. Yeah, so I found basil and parsley do really well being direct seeded, and they do their thing. Without really seeing more of what's going on, it's hard for me to say what you might be doing wrong. Baking soil sometimes, if you're seeding and the soil is getting hit really hard by the sun for 8-10 hours, sometimes basil and parsley doesn't do well. Any seeds that are germinating, and I'm going to be talking about this for what we're talking about, that you're germinating when it's warm out and hot out, you have to keep the watering up. I keep trying to start broccoli inside. It sprouts in a couple of days and then instantly gets leggy. So your cool weather crops are going to look a bit leggy even planted outside because the warmth accelerates the growing. So they will get leggy and flop over. The other thing is I have lots of videos on lights. Like, you need lighting. So if you're trying to start seeds by a windowsill, it's not enough light. It's just not enough light. It's never going to be enough light. So they're going to get very tall and leggy and fall over. If you're using basic shop lights, 5,000 lumens, daylight rating, you want the lights to be really close, and you want the lights to be on for a good 12 hours. But a lot of times it's really related to the amount of light they're getting. Nicole, when is it safe to eat your leafy greens after using dust for insects on them? I really hate using it, but they've been relentless. And the neem didn't quite cut it. Yeah, so neem oil is great for chewing insects, like on your brassicas and stuff like that. I don't like putting neem on spinach or lettuce or anything like that because they're fragile and it's hard to wash off. And even though neem is organic, I don't want to be eating it. There's lots of organic dusts like Spinach, Captain Jack's, that I think you have to read the label, but if you dust on there and then you just rinse it off, it's pretty much safe to eat, right away. The Spinach doesn't affect people. according to the product, and there's a lot of research on it, but you can really rinse it off, you know. I mean, if you're worried, you know, I'd wait, put it down, insects are under control, make sure you come in, you wash it off, and then 5 or 7 days later, I would eat it. That's something that I wouldn't worry about for spinosad. And Nicole, that's a good question too, because the leafy greens and all your cool weather crops, like I was saying, are going to be really susceptible to insect diseases because the insects are out there hunting, looking for great stuff. So you want to have a plan in place. All right, let me just see if I missed any questions before I go on. Julie, I often do not have enough greens versus browns for my compost. We have a small yard, so grass is not really an option. What are other things to add in to heat up your compost? It really needs to be greens. You can actually use urine, which is effective, and you have to dilute it. I don't know the dilution ratio, but a lot of people will use urine for that reason. Quantity-wise, in theory, you can buy a 40-pound bag of alfalfa pellets. They are still green and they're compressed and dried. It's now probably $15 to $20 for a 40 or 50-pound bag. Just add water, let them swell up, break up into particles, and you can mix that into your leaves, and that will heat it up. My compost pile is overrun with ants. Is there a way to stop them from happening? I mean, you can use what I just said if you caught that. Borax ant baits. Just go to my channel and look up ant baits or killing ants or borax, and it will show you how to make it. It's safe. I show you how to use it in a mason jar so your pets can't get to it. And I would just make a couple of those jars, drop them around, let the ants get to it. All right, so next thing, these tips, again, are really important because it's a different ball game going from late summer into fall. Sun can kill your germinating seeds. So seed germinates, puts out a little root in the bottom, a little green up top, maybe not even fill that inch of space. Sun comes out one day, 95 degrees, I forget what that is Fahrenheit, but that's really hot. We're sweating, we don't like to be out there. The sun heats up that top inch, top 2.5 centimeters to well over 100 degrees. It dries it out. The germinating seed has no moisture, gets too hot, it's dead. You want to water, 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 especially for your germinating seeds every day when the temperatures are way too hot. You know, if they're not in that cooler range that I was talking about. And you want to do that every day for a good 10 days, if not 14 days, until the root systems get bigger and get further into the ground. It's really important. This is a tip that's really important too, because people don't always understand this. Say you're growing your transplants inside. They get to 6 or 8 weeks. They're beautiful, nice big green growth. You have this little tiny root ball in the seed tray. You pop it out, you put it in the ground, you soak all your soil, but all that plant has, all your transplant has, is just that little square, root ball. Those leaves are going to suck the moisture out of that zone like that on that hot day. The sun hitting the leaves is going to pull all the water out. The root systems haven't spread out to the bed. So even if the whole bed is soaked, it's only surviving off, let's just use my fist, off the little root space like this. So you have to water your transplants every day for a good 10 to 14 days when you're going from late summer into fall, especially when those temperatures get up, so that they don't die. I mean, they're going to die off that quickly. All right, let's see. We've got some more tips. This one's really important too, because we tend to overdo it. When the plants are small, like if you're a family of 2, family of 4, maybe you only need 2 to 4 collard plants, or 2 kale, 2 collards. Plants are, small. You put in 8, 10, 12 because you have the space. You're never going to eat all that. You're just creating a haven for whiteflies to move in, for insects to move in, for caterpillars to move in, for disease to move in. Sometimes you're better off planting fewer plants, like 2 collards, 2 kale, 2 to 4 plants, and tending them really well, because you can stay up on the pests and diseases, and you end up getting a better harvest, and you have a better experience because you're not always spraying and chasing down problems that tend to jump all the way down the line on your plant. So don't overplant if you don't have to. Succession planting is really important. Radishes are one of the crops I put in now when it's cooler. If you put in 200 radish seeds now, in about 25 to 40 days, you're going to have to eat 200 radishes. So I recommend put in, 25, 30, 40 radishes now. After they germinate, 2 weeks later, another 25 to 40 radish seeds. After they germinate, 2 weeks later, another 25 to 40 seeds. That's what we call succession planting. This way they're harvesting over a longer period over the fall, and you don't have to eat them all at once. And you can do that with lettuce, you can do that with spinach, you can do that with carrots. You can do it with a lot of things. It's all going to depend on how long your season is for the fall. And then finally, shade cloth. And I talked about this earlier, that 50% shade cloth is perfect to get a lot of these crops out sooner, because the shade cloth is going to keep the soil cooler. It's not going to heat up to that 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the really hot temperatures. It's going to keep it cooler, and your cool crops will just progress nice and slowly over time. And when the cool weather comes, and it's here, more permanently, let's say, take that shade cloth off, and you're going to have a great garden. You're going to get things really early to the table. All right, any more questions on that? And just want, again, the ideal temps for direct seeding here in Maryland is really 55 degree Fahrenheit nights, 12.5 degrees Celsius, 75 degree Fahrenheit days, 23.5 degrees Celsius. Those are just the perfect ranges for a fall garden. And if your temperatures are always like that, you can just keep growing and growing and growing. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. Let me see if there's any questions. Compost is overrun. I got that one. And I'm going to go over the plant varieties to plant again too. Rebecca, who is a PERC member, attempting a hot compost pile. How often should I turn it and water it? So I have a hot compost thermometer that I just put into the core, and when it drops below 100, that's when I turn it. Watering, that's just going to vary on how much rain we get, but I wait for it to cool down. Like a hot compost pile will get up to 120, 140 degrees. When it drops below 100, I usually turn it. That's when I would throw in some water if I needed to. Best way to keep weeds out of your compost is not to put weeds in your compost. And the only way that you can do that is to look at the seed heads of lawns. If they have seed heads, you're going to probably be putting seeds, weed seeds into there. That's the only way to do it. If you're worried, Enoch is, I think, making a point. If you're worried about seeds blowing, like there's some pretty, successful weeds that just put out these, floating seeds, definitely cover it. Serena, what causes basil to do better in a fabric pot than a GreenStalk? The leaves at the bottom of the GreenStalks are yellowing, but the fabric pot is thriving. So, I don't really know. Maybe if you fed them all equally, then it's not fertilizer, but it could be nitrogen. If you have multiple things growing in your GreenStalk, different tiers, the root systems of different plants can really pull nitrogen out quicker, versus maybe you just have a fabric pot of basil and it's just the basil and it's doing its own thing in there. I'm planting more berries in the fall in a GreenStalk. Can I possibly do 2 strawberries in the slot? How closely can berry bushes and blueberries be together? I I haven't done blueberries in a GreenStalk. I wouldn't do that. I don't think you're saying that. I space my blueberry plants out 3 feet, a little bit closer. After 5 years, they're going to get pretty tight, but I don't mind them that way. And you can put 2 strawberry plants into a slot. My Dolce Fresca basil has black fungus on it. Never had it before. I used 3% peroxide spray. The plants lost the leaves. So peroxide can damage plants even when diluted. So you always have to test spray. And basil's pretty fragile. I would just give them a big drink of a nitrogen water-soluble fertilizer and they should come back. Keep it moving. Question, have garden spots lots of sun in spring to midsummer, but almost full of shade from midsummer on. Suggestion for edibles in that area. If you don't have 6 hours of sun getting to your plants, it is hard to grow something edible. Plants that can take less sun are the leafy greens, radishes. They can do okay, but there's nothing that I can think of that does really well, with less than 6 hours of sun. They can straggle along, but they're never really that healthy. Sorry. When do I start fertilizing my container cucumbers, which is just over a month old? If it's in a container, it's been 4 weeks, you can give them a light drink of water-soluble fertilizer now. When they're small, a quick drink is fine, and maybe that's once every 3 or 4 weeks. When they're bigger, you're probably going to have to be going with every 14 days. I compost weeds. I don't worry about it, so I shouldn't compost weeds. I figured that meant the compost was doing well to have things kind of growing in it. If you can compost anything, a weed is just something we don't want. We call it a weed. If they have mature flower heads on there or close to mature and you throw a weed in there, sometimes those seeds take, even though you've unrooted the plant, it just takes the energy from the plant and creates seeds. It's just up to you. Trisha, also a perk member. Any tips for having my plants flower and fruit earlier next year? No, there's nothing really special you can do. It looks like you got them outside in May. You could try a little bit earlier. You can, put a cage around them and wrap plastic around them early on. Maybe the heat helps. But, aside from starting earlier, there's nothing you can do to speed up flowering or fruiting, unfortunately. You can try different varieties. That's probably the best bet, is to find varieties that mature sooner, and that will help out wherever you're growing. David, how is pine bedding shavings for mulch? I think it's fine. Some people say it creates too much acidity. That's not really true, so I would definitely use that. Wendy, can I plant sweet potato slips now in Northern Virginia? No. Good question. Potatoes and sweet potatoes are different. So potatoes, you can do some planting and hope they make it. Sweet potatoes, you have to plant as a slip way back in, Northern VA, similar to me, back in May. They need a good 120 days of summer heat to really create a beautiful rhizome sweet potato. I don't know, Zoso. What can you grow in a trellis in fall besides peas? I don't know. Maybe other people can answer that for you. But basically peas. Cucumber leaves are spotting. They're going to need an antifungal, your green thumb. Anytime you start seeing the yellow spots, it's usually a fungus that came in. And I would just pick your antifungal, spray the top and bottom, do it again in about 7 to 10 days, and hopefully that gets the fungus under control. All right, 5 minutes left. Let me go back to the crops. So some of the crops, now again, remember, I'm in Maryland Zone 7. Cooler now. We talked about what to direct seed in September. I'll get to those in a second. But mid-July, August, it's hotter here, full sun, temperatures get really warm. You can direct seed broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels, peas, kale, collards, cabbage, carrots, beets, turnips, lettuce, chard, endives. They do really well in the warmer temperatures. Maybe you have to put a shade cloth over them, but they tend to take a little bit longer to germinate, or I'm sorry, they take a little bit longer to mature. So you want to get them growing, especially Brussels, cabbage, and broccoli. If I put seeds in now, for instance, for my broccoli, cabbage, and Brussels, they might form a nice head before the heavy freeze rolls in here in Maryland, but it's going to be tight. So I like getting them out August 1st. Other things that you can sow when it's warmer that are technically not cool crops, but they can take a freeze in their perennials are oregano, thyme, chives, and sage. You can seed those now where you want. They'll establish, and come next spring, you're going to have your perennial herbs established. Dill and cilantro are great to put into the ground in August here in Maryland. You can direct seed them also in September. For direct seeding specifically to September here in Maryland, and again, if you are where it's warmer, everything I mentioned you might be able to put in now. So there's no rule. Like, it gets confusing to people sometimes because you'll see all these videos. What to plant in July, what to plant in August, what to plant in September, October, etc. That's going to vary going up north, down south. If you go over to Australia, I would love to have more Australian subscribers because when my winter comes, your summer is active. Their seasons are totally flipped around. So this whole video really was on how to kind of get an overview to plan out the planting for your fall garden. And I do recommend you guys keep journals, test things out, put seeds in, track the dates, and just see how they do. That's the only way to really figure it out. So for direct seeding now in Maryland, I recommend radishes, spinach, Chinese cabbage, bok choy, pak choy, and arugula. Those crops, generally speaking, if it's too hot, don't typically germinate well, or they bolt and flower. So I like to wait till it's cooler. I also direct seed in another wave of beets, turnips, and carrots now. And they can be planted sooner. I planted them sooner here in Maryland, but this is just my next wave. So maybe I start lettuce, and maybe I start all these to pick from. I can't think of one. So maybe I start lettuce, turnips, and carrots August 1st. They get growing. It's now been 4 or 5 weeks. I put in my next round of lettuce, turnips, and carrots. This way they're not all maturing at once. So you can direct seed, not just plants that can only be seeded in September here in Maryland, but plants that you already seeded. You're spacing out when you put in the seeds. All right, that is the presentation. We have 2 minutes. I'm going to answer the last of these questions, and then we will call it a day. Hope you guys have a great holiday Monday. That's my art. What is your suggestion for growing broccoli? I'm in zone 8. I like growing broccoli. I can't grow it here in Maryland zone 7 because it gets too hot spring into summer. It just doesn't form a nice head. So I planted broccoli as transplants. I have them ready to go back in August. So I do like getting transplants in now, 6 weeks old, 8 weeks old. So I do recommend transplants. If you want to go with seed and you're going to put a plastic cover over them, they can do well too, like a little low tunnel or something to kind of keep them warmer. They can definitely take a frost. It's when that heavy freeze comes and the broccoli crown is forming that those flowers, or bud basically, can get soft and mushy if the freeze is too intense. So you could get the broccoli in now. You may have to protect it a little bit. And again, I would suggest giving it a try. You can eat the leaves for sure, so you'll get something out of it, but you want to kind of test it out and see what date works the best. Nina, this question may sound so dumb, but how moist should your soil be for direct seeding? I don't really know. I never really paid attention to that. It shouldn't be bone dry because it gets too fluffy and the seeds can drop down a little bit. So a little bit moist, but it really doesn't matter. You're gonna, loosen it up. Check out those videos that I've put into the video description. That will help you. But as soon as you put the seeds in, just water it in well, and then you don't have to worry about anything. If your broccoli is growing but it's not forming a head, you're just waiting on it. So I wouldn't start over. It's just not ready to do that. If you have broccoli, cauliflower, you have shorter seasons, looking for varieties of your cool weather crops that mature sooner. The to harvest date is smaller. Sometimes is a really good strategy. All right, let me see where we're at. What can I seed now to sprout in the spring besides bunching onions? It depends on where you live. For me, kale and spinach, I seed now, and I seed late, and then it starts growing again in the spring. The kale will get buds and flowers that are delicious, tiny leaves, and the spinach just seems to do well here in Maryland, and it gets really large early spring. Another question, when planting areas for seeds, do you remove the roots of previous plants or just break them up? I don't remove them, but I loosen the soil up a good 4 inches. If it were transplants, I would just dig a hole, put the transplant in, don't worry about it. But for seeds, I fluff up and loosen the top 4 inches of soil, which is about 10 centimeters. Zone 7A, make sure if you put a question out there, you put question in front of it, but I did see this one. Garlic, I will start putting into my garden really November now, early November, for the hardneck garlic, and it does really well. All right, we are done. I hope you enjoyed the video. I have public Q&As where I just take any question from subscribers every second Thursday, fourth Thursday. It's called Garden Grounds at 11 a.m. Also have perk memberships, which is very similar to this format if you want to join that. And then at the beginning of every month, I will be probably doing a video, depending on the month. Like December, I may not have one. But what do you plant for that month? So the next one will be, what do you plant in October? It's going to be very similar to what we're talking about. But in October, you're planting crops that could also do well covered in plastic. So if you want to check that out, that will be coming. All right, you guys have a great Monday.